Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/72nd scale British TOG-1 Super Heavy Tank. The model that you see here is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and/or purchase. However, I often mention in these videos that I frequently take on projects from scales ranging between 1/35th scale and 1/6 scale. With this model here being 172, this isn't really a scale that I actively work in, nor is it a scale that I offer commission build services in. However, if anyone is curious or is interested in the scales that I do work in, I can be reached via the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. This model here was built predominantly out of the box. However, I went ahead and made some extra modifications in addition to the model, bringing it up to the condition that we have here. In this video, I'm going to be giving this model a thorough in-box review, as well as also going over the modifications that I just referenced. So stay tuned because there's going to be a bit of info coming right at you. To start this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this vehicle here is the British TOG-1 Super Heavy Tank prototype. This vehicle was designed by the British military back in the late 1930s timeframe. This vehicle, along with several others, were in development at the same time, and this vehicle here was going to fulfill the niche role of the super heavy tank. The vehicle's design is basically the antithesis of the expression generals fighting the last war, because this design here is firmly rooted in World War I with the use of the rhomboidal tank shape. Also, just like with the other previous generation tanks, this vehicle had an unsprung suspension, so it was going to be a bit rough when going and traversing off-road. What made the TOG-1 unique, however, was with its propulsion system. Unlike the previous generation tanks, which utilized the gas engine for the main propulsion, this one here was going to utilize an electric generator type system, much along the lines as you would see Ferdinand Porsche messing around with around the same time, where you have a gas engine that would power an alternator, and then this would give electric current to propel electric motors that would control the tracks. It's a very unique system, and it's one that's been used on several other vehicles in time. Basically, locomotives utilize this, submarines utilize this, but for use on a tracked vehicle, this was something that hasn't really been done all that often, and the few times it hasn't really worked out all that well. However, this was going to be the method of propulsion for a vehicle of this size, and this was a massive size vehicle. The vehicle weighed in at 90 tons, so that was, pretty heavy, even for modern standards. Another departure that made the TOG unique compared to its World War I counterparts was the use of a fully revolving turret. This is something that you don't really see on vehicles with the rhomboidal shape. In addition to the turret, it was also going to have some sponson armaments as well. A prototype was eventually created and went through some trials. What was unique about the prototype was that they utilized the turret from a Matilda tank as a placeholder, and then the vehicle, however, never had its side sponson armament fitted in place. The vehicle apparently had a successful trial. However, the interest of the Army faded away when the Churchill tank was also tested at the same time, and that vehicle was proven to be more of a viable alternative compared to this giant lumbering dinosaur of a vehicle. What eventually happened, apparently, was, as the story goes, after the trials, it was sent to Chobham, England for some more trials, and then from there, nobody knows. The vehicle basically fell off the face of the earth. It's also important to note that in addition to the TOG-1, I presume several of the lessons learned from this vehicle were incorporated into another super heavy tank, which was known as the TOG-2, but of course that's a topic for another video for another day. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this 1/72nd scale TOG British Heavy Tank prototype model that you see here. Normally at this point of the video, I would talk about the kit's history and the background and the company and all that. Unfortunately, you can't really do that for this one because this one here is not a standard injection plastic molded model. This one here is all made from 3D print. This model here was procured from shapeways.com, and the vendor, along with the direct link to find this particular kit here, can be found in the video description listed below. The model itself is entirely printed as a single printing that contains both the hull and the turret, and you'll see that in better depth when I remove the model from the packaging. And by packaging, again, typically you'll see my models on this table over here where they have a box art and I go into the Illustrator and all that good stuff and the graphic design. Yeah, none of that here because shapeways.com. The model comes in a Ziploc bag, all self-contained, simple and sweet. But it's not really the box art that is what's cool about this model, it's what's inside. So here we have the model removed from the packaging. Like with many of the models on shapeways.com, this kit here is mostly all-encompassing in that basically all of the details that would normally be separate sub-assemblies that need to be glued in place are integrally printed on their locations, and the model is basically ready to go from the get-go. The only thing you got to do is to snip off the turret that we have here via these two little sprues, and then you're ready for painting at that point. These models here are, again, mostly just a exercise in paint and weathering, opposed to something that is a exercise in actual construction. And this is something that may or may not turn off some people out there, but I'll go into that more towards the latter half of the video. Like with many of the models on shapeways.com, this kit here is mostly all-encompassing in that basically all of the details that would normally be separate sub-assemblies that need to be glued in place are integrally printed on their locations, and the model is basically ready to go from the get-go. The only thing you got to do is to snip off the turret that we have here via these two little sprues, and then you're ready for painting at that point. These models here are, again, mostly just a exercise in paint and weathering, opposed to something that is a exercise in actual construction. And this is something that may or may not turn off some people out there, but I'll go into that more towards the latter half of the video. So bringing the model up closer, you get to see the details in better light. Starting with the tracks, you can see that the tracks have the little rivet pattern details in place, which is, of course, appropriate for this pattern of vehicle. We also have here several other bits of riveting found on the top plate. The rear engine deck is pretty sparse of detailing, but again, this is just, I presume, more true to form to the actual subject matter at hand. We have here the exhaust manifolds. Again, arguably a bit basic, but for the scale, it's definitely more than suffice for the job. And on the back portion over here, not really a whole lot to be mentioned. On the sides, we have some really good detailing here on the roller mounts. Kind of reminds me of the Char 2C a little bit, but that is a bit of a different design, but you know, kind of similar in its overall appearance. But you can see all of the integral printed on details on the hubs themselves. The track tensioner, arguably a little bit on the simplistic end, but you know, more again, it definitely gets you the look and feel of what you're looking for. We have this really interesting gauge that's found right here on the side, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe this was for testing to see how the tank transverses over rough terrain, and it was just a way to gauge the vehicle's performance. This was something that is seen on several of the real photographs of the real vehicle, which is true to form for some of the other fittings that I'll be touching upon momentarily. But it's a nice little bit of detailing that is integrally printed on. On the other armor plates, again, you have some more plate detailing, some rivet detailing. Looks pretty good, all things considered. And this leads us to the section over here, which would normally contain side sponsons with side sections of armament. On this model, since it is replicating the actual vehicle, when it was going through its trials, it didn't have these sections fitted in place at that point. So you have these large gaping open areas over here, which have what I believe are the engines found on the inside. The engines are basically detailed for what they are, but again, it's a nice little bit of detailing nonetheless, and it gives a bit of intrigue to the model as a whole. Personally, I would have loved if you would have had the side sponsons as separate sections that you could just pop on in place if you want to render it in that configuration, but sadly, the way you see it is, you know, what you get. And, you know, there's nothing really bad about that, but I would have really preferred if it had those pieces to go with it as well. Just another option. On the front section over here, we have the bow armament, and it looks very similar to the one found on the Char B1 Bis. I'm not sure if it's the same weapon or not, but just it has that, it just screams with that era and also with just the geometry on these parts. It's very B1 Bis-like. Here we have the visor. On the real one, this I believe was glass, and this was only there for the trials. If the vehicle would have progressed further, I'm pretty sure there would have been an armored periscope or visor in this section over there, but the way you see it again is as per that rendering. On a similar note, we have here the Matilda turret, which looks like a Matilda turret, which is great. It's got all the little accoutrements on there, such as the little Lee Enfield smoke grenade launchers right there on the side. It's got the cupola, the mantlet. It looks really, really good. The one thing missing, of course, is the main armament for the turret, but again, this is true to form to the actual example, which did not have the armament fitted in place when those photographs were taken. One other thing I want to mention is that the model is a hollow printing, which means it is very, very light. This thing is like a feather, so that's, you know, good for some aspects. Some other aspects, some people may consider that a ding, as they like to have some weight on their models for one reason or another, help settling it down for dioramas or possibly other types of usage. But, you know, keep in mind for this one here, it is hollow. Also on that note, you'll see that it is bottomless, and you have a Flintstones mobile type situation going for you on this one. This is something that I'm definitely going to be addressing on this build here, and I'm just going to fasten a brand new floor plate out of a strip of sheet styrene, but that's something I'm going to discuss as the video goes on. One of the last things I want to mention about this model here involves the actual material that the unit is printed in. You see, many of the other models and releases that are found on the Shapeways marketplace are available in a multitude of different options, from the resin print to the nylon to, you know, whatever thing they have under the sun. Well, for this particular listing here, that's not the case, and it's only offered in the white nylon material that you see presently. The nylon itself is a great material, and it should yield for some excellent results once everything is fully painted and weathered, which we'll see how that turns out momentarily. With the model back into the shop, the first thing I'm going to do is address the large cavernous Flintstone mobile floor plate that we have here on the bottom. This is an optional bit of procedure, however, it's one that I personally like, just so I have the knowledge that my model has a floorboard on it. The material, I normally would utilize some plastic card or some sheet styrene. However, for this one, I'm going to recycle this strip here of HD3D print mounting plate. This here was, I believe, from the 1/16 scale M1 Abrams exhaust deflector grill, which is the topic of another video that I recently posted a little while ago. And, you know, once the grills get fitted in place, this is just a, you know, leftover sprue. So rather than having it sit and languish away in a spare bin, I might as well go ahead and chop it up and utilize it for this 3D printed model. Since both pieces are 3D print, I think it's more than appropriate that I utilize this bit of a material here for this application. Normally, however, yeah, plastic card would be more than suitable for this task. Another thing at this time, I noticed that once the turret was removed, I went ahead and popped it onto the model, and you can see that it's very, very, very loose. So the tolerances are extremely loose on these sections. Now, this is something that seems to be even so loose that the layers of paint buildup are probably not going to be suffice at keeping this thing in place, so I may have to add some kind of a shim or something to the ring over here in order to stiffen it up, just so that the piece stays in place in a firmer manner. So as we saw before, the turret is on really, really loose. So much so that on this build here, I'm actually going to go ahead and remedy that by making a sleeve. Basically what this is going to do, this is going to plug onto the turret like you see here. And this PVC section is now going to eat up this difference that's remaining here on the turret neck hole found on the remainder of the model. In order to do this, this is just a PVC pipe that I turned on the lathe to the appropriate proportions. Now I'm going to snip this piece off with a saw and then clean it off, deburr it, glue it to the turret, and then the turret should be a nice snug fit. Should be a nice snug fit onto the corresponding section on the hull. So after a moment or two, you can see that the turret has been taken care of, as well as the lower portion of the hull. There's that PVC ring I mentioned before. Once it was machined to the appropriate size, it was glued to the bottom portion of the turret, and the turret now just literally snaps directly into place, and it holds it on very, very, very well. As for the bottom of the hull, that piece of HD 3D print was trimmed to the appropriate shape, and now is just glued in place. Once the glue's set, I'm going to do a little bit of body work over here in the back. As you can see, I'm using super glue for that. Once that sets, a little bit of sandpaper, and the lower hull pan is also completed. This leads us to the next part of the build, and I want to go ahead and improve it from what the kit original offering is. As I touched upon before, the kit is intended to replicate this vehicle when it was undergoing its trials. That's why we have such interesting details such as the absence of the main tube, as well as also these open sections here where the sponson armament would have been. Well, for this model here, I wanted to go ahead and build it in a more, let's just say, completed format. And to do that, I need to go ahead and add these little bits of missing details. And those new components are found right over here. These are brand new HD 3D printed components that I designed and printed up for this particular kit here. Just like this model, these pieces are also found on Shapeways, only these ones here are found on the East Coast Armory Shapeways store, and the link to these items can be found via the link listed in the video description. To come up with the components that you see here, I went ahead and actually utilized for reference the World War I Mark IV tank in order to come up with the sponson armament. And as for the main tube for the Matilda turret, this was also something that I tooled up utilizing some blueprints. The set that you see here is a pre-production sample. The actual production units will have both the main sponson armaments as well as the tube found on the integral printing. And it'll be one little spread that gives you all the parts needed to upgrade one of these models. With the part brought closer to the camera, hopefully this comes out in better light. But the sponsons are fully detailed with the armor plate, the riveting detailing, as well as also the armament detailing, which would include the MG ball, as well as the main rotor drum here for the side armament. In addition to that, there's also interior detailing as well, and I'll touch upon that momentarily. See, with the way the model is designed, you do have some interesting interior detailing here for the engine compartment, and I didn't want to lose that. So basically, I wanted to make these sponsons actually plug into these two sections over here, giving you for the best of both worlds. You get the completed look of the vehicle with its full armament, but if you want to display the model with its engine interior exposed, you simply just slip them out. And this feature is actually built into these sets over here, and are actually designed to plug into these sections found on the model sides. Because this model does have the interior detailing over here, I might as well transition the interior detailing on these components as well. Everything, as you notice, is a single 3D print, so there's no other assembly required outside of snipping the parts off of the sprue and inserting them to their appropriate locations. With the component removed off of the sprue, you get to see the interior detailing now in better light. The interior detailing is fairly basic, however, there is some pretty interesting detail to be had. We have here a Lewis gun on the left-hand side. It's going to be really hard to get it on frame since everything is really tiny and this clear material isn't really photographed too well at this point. But on the opposite end, we also have some heavier armament. This was based off of, again, the interior images of a real Mark IV tank that I was able to find online, and I basically just transferred as many of those details over into this really tiny 1/72nd scale counterpart. We do have breech detailing, we do have recuperator detailing, as well as some basic carriage detailing as well. Once everything is fully painted, it'll really then come into better light. Here you can see what it looks like fitted to the model. The piece just simply plugs into place like you see with the one on the opposite side. The barrel gets fitted in place. You simply just drill out the center portion of the mantle with a pin vise, and the 3D printed barrel just plugs in as one would imagine. On the piece here, there's a slight adjustment I'm going to have to make to the CAD file. As you see, it fits in great, but there is just a little bit of extra space on the sides. And on this one here, I took care of it by adding a small little shim out of sheet styrene. The same exact procedure is going to be done to this one over here, but this little feature will be found on the actual production units. Aside from the parts that I just mentioned, I also went ahead and added a few more little tweaks to the model itself. The area over here, which is the antenna base, actually is originally a column that supports the turret onto the hull, as we saw before with the single printing. When that was snipped off, so was that column, and also the column was a bit overly thick for an antenna. So the antenna base remained. I simply drilled that section out with a pin vise so that after the model is painted, a little bit of wire can be added, giving you the complete detailing of the antenna wire. The other thing I drilled out with a pin vise are the two grenade launchers that are right here on the side, which are used to launch smoke grenades. As for these sections here, I just simply drill these areas out with a pin vise, just giving them a little bit more added accuracy, and this will be more appreciated again once everything is fully painted and weathered. With the model fully completed, the first area I'm going to mention is with the underhull. I currently temporarily unplugged the sponson side over there just to make putting on its side all that much more easier. But regardless, with the model on its side, you get to see the new fabricated floorboard in its completed format. As I mentioned before, when the model was stock, this area is missing, and arguably, in my opinion, it's one of the shortcomings of the kit. Fortunately, it's not something that's very, very hard to fabricate, nor is it anywhere close to being a deal breaker, and with just a few hand cuts here and there of styrene or of some other material of your choice, you can easily fabricate the floor panel like I did on this build here. Once fitted in place, it really does give the model a more complete look and feel compared to the original configuration. Also, I may have mentioned this before, but in case I didn't, another tip that some people out there may be interested in listening to is some people out there like, specifically on their smaller scale builds, to add a little bit of weight to the inside, and this is done by utilizing like a fish weight or some washers or anything along those lines. Well, if you are the type of person that would be interested in doing that type of procedure, this can easily be done specifically to the floorboard. You take the washers or the weights, glue them to the inside of the model, or just glue them to the bottom portion of the floor plate, and then once it's glued in place, everything will seal up and the model will have the floorboards, and it will also have a little bit of extra weight, which again, some people out there tend to want to have on their models. However, the addition of the floor plate here is definitely one that can only improve the model and definitely has absolutely no detrimental effects whatsoever. Outside the floorboards, before I actually go over the stock details, there's not really a whole lot going on over there. I might as well reference the other modifications that I referenced earlier on in this video, namely the new 3D printed details that were added to the sides as well as also to the main armament. So here you get to see the sponson section unplugged from the model. In its final form, you get to see what the paintwork looks like. And on the interior portion over here, you also get to appreciate the interior detailing now fully painted. It gives a nice little extra kick to the model compared to just leaving it in its stock configuration. Also, on that note, you get to see the engine interior detailing right over here. This is totally stock. The only thing that I did was I carefully just painted everything with the colors that you see presently. The other section here is removable. However, it is on the snug side. This occurred after the model was painted and varnished. This led for the sponson to be held on in a nice snug manner. If push comes to shove, I can get the piece to come off. However, it's just not really worth it, specifically since I already have one of the units popped off for this video. Trying to manhandle the other one, it's not really worth it. And basically get the idea that you see here. So as for this section, like I mentioned before, it just plugs on in place with no other methods being required. No fasteners, no magnets, nothing. It's just a friction fit, and as you can see, it's more than capable of doing the job in hand. Moving upward to the next added on detailing, which is the armament over here on the Matilda turret. This is the little barrel that I referenced before, and as you can see, it's just been mounted in place, leaving for the end result that you see here. And it definitely gives the model a more complete look compared to leaving it in its stock configuration. Of course, the purists out there are going to say that this is totally wrong, and yes, they are correct. The Matilda turret, from what I understood, was a stopgap measure. Not really a stopgap measure, it was really just a placeholder, because the actual turret that was going to be used on this vehicle wasn't developed yet, so they needed something to put on at that time. So regardless, like I stated before, this one does have some creative licensing to it, so that's why I went ahead and, rendered out in the following format. One other thing I wanted to say, I inadvertently created, like the tank from the Last Crusade, the last Indiana Jones movie. Yes, that was the last Indiana Jones movie. This was totally by accident, by the way. I had no idea I was going to go out and set forth and actually do it. I just went ahead and built the model. Next thing I know, like before I started filming this video over here, I'm like, oh yeah, it does kind of look like the Indiana Jones tank. It's kind of funny how things work out. On a similar note, I wouldn't be surprised if the art department who were working on that movie saw a picture of the TOG, this particular one here, and actually decide, hey, that's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and use that as as a basis to design their movie prop on, because it looks very, very similar, and there's really not a whole lot of other vehicles out there that have the rhomboidal shape with a turret on it. So that's why after, working on this one here, and after, I had that realization, I wouldn't be surprised, now this is totally just me spitballing, but I wouldn't be surprised if the TOG 1 was probably the inspiration that gave us the tank from the Last Crusade Indiana Jones movie. So that is something to, factor in. It might be a total coincidence, but if anyone does know, it would be an interesting topic to talk about in the comment section listed below. Regardless, back to this one over here. Yeah, so I went with the little, the standard armament for the Matilda for this turret, and in my opinion, it kind of works. It looks pretty cool with it. Carrying on to some of the other modified details that were supplied with the kit takes to the smoke grenade launchers. The smoke grenade launchers on this vehicle here are very cool because they are the British World War II smoke grenade launchers, and what made them really interesting was that they were just modified Lee Enfield rifles, or I should say it was a Lee Enfield action. So it was literally the rear section of a Lee Enfield with the bolt and the trigger and everything, and on the front end, instead of the barrel, they had this giant, the closest thing I could describe is the cannon for the AR-15. It's basically the same thing. And this is what was used to launch smoke grenades. You put the smoke grenades in these sections over here. The rifle would be loaded with blank ammunition, and then there was literally a string that came from the trigger right into a little hole on the side of the vehicle, and when they wanted to fire the smoke grenade launcher, you just yank on that string and poof, it just launches the smoke grenade out of the launcher, and once it lands, the grenade can detonate, making a nice little plume of smoke. Regardless, all that out of the way, that it is something important to point out, because when you're painting them, you want to make sure you paint them appropriately. And the British smoke grenade launchers, the metal sections would all be in black. However, because it was based on Lee Enfield action, the bottom portion of the smoke grenade launcher was wood, because again, Lee Enfield. So when you're painting, you want to make sure you go ahead and paint the wooden sections appropriately, as these would, have that nice red wood color that would be varnished and treated that would be found on the other Lee Enfield rifles of the period. As for other mods that were made to them, I may have mentioned before, I drilled out these two sections here with a pin vise and a small Dremel bit, giving the model just a little bit more extra accuracy. On a similar note, on the antenna base over here, I drilled this out and I was able to fit in a small little piece of floor wire. And the antenna base was painted black, as on the British World War II tanks, the antenna bases were made out of rubber. So that's another thing a lot of people tend to omit on their British tank builds, regardless of scale. Moving back to the remainder of the model, like I stated before, everything on this build here is more or less an exercise in paintwork as opposed to actual fabrication. And one other thing I want to mention, it goes again to the material that this model is made in. As I mentioned earlier in the video, when it comes to the 3D printed material found on shapeways.com, you have the natural color, and then you also have a material called processed. The processed material is a bit more finer in its surface detailing, and because of that, you will have slightly less grain compared to the standard option. However, this comes at a cost, and sometimes a severe cost. Like I mentioned before, on this model over here, I didn't opt for the upgraded material, and I stayed with the standard baseline white nylon material, and as you can see here, it really didn't cause any sort of problems. The model surface paints extremely well after a coat of primer, and then once the main paints are added on top of that, the surface really blends in very, very nicely, and overall the model has a very nice look to it. So continuing with the paint work, you can see the tracks that we have here have been painted, weathered to the following condition. And this obviously is all done via the paintbrush. The tracks are all integrally printed, so you're going to have to go in there and paint everything accordingly. On a rhomboidal shaped vehicle like this, painting of these type of tracks are actually very, very easily done. But you just want to, be careful along the edges, because this is where the paint can easily cross over its necessary bounds. And then if the paint is not at the correct consistency, you can just run all over the place, or you'll have an extra paint swipe or two to contend with. So that is really the most amount of caution needs to be addressed by the builder during the painting portion of the build. Outside of that, the tracks painted very, very well, and they dry brushed even better to the condition that you see presently. On the rear portion here, there's this gauge, which I believe was for testing purposes, and this was to adjust or see exactly the angle that the vehicle was maneuvering when it was going up and down certain slopes and other type of hills and obstacles, and that of course is found on the rendering that we have here. And just to help the model pop a little bit, I just simply painted it. This was painted with flat white with a paintbrush, much along the lines as I've seen on the photographs of the real example. I believe it was also a white color if I'm not mistaken, but regardless, you can see how it turned out on the model over here, and it gives the model a nice little bit of color pop and a little bit of detail accent in this section here of the vehicle's hull. Otherwise, be fairly plain, and it's not really a whole lot going on the entire build, so making the model pop wherever you can is definitely something that helps in the long run. Moving up takes to the exhaust manifolds. I just went ahead and painted and weathered them in my usual format. The rust is actually the Sophisticated Finishes rusting agent, where it's a real rust. You apply it with a paintbrush. It's a two-part type mix, where the first is a iron paint. It's basically like iron filings in a paint format, and you add them to whatever surface you want rusted. Then once the stuff dries, there is this activating agent that gets brushed on, and that will actually cause rust to grow on the model. And this is something I've utilized on a number of builds for many years because it looks really good because it's really rust. The stuff looks great, but it will change as time goes on, as the rust will continue to keep, progressing. And right now, you can see what it looks like in its later stage. The model was actually built about a year ago before filming this video, and so you get to see what the rust looks like now a year on. Also, as a similar note, if I pop the sponson side again, I use the exact same paint on the inside over here, and you can see it aged a bit differently compared to the one left to the elements, or I should say to the outside environment that we have in the room. So that is something to keep in mind. Of course, after the rust was added, the exhaust soot was added on these two sides here. But what generally happens is that as the model begins to age, it actually rusts, the areas that were painted over, the rust actually just grows over it, and at least for the end result that you see here. It still looks great, but it is something that you may want to consider, specifically if you're looking for a certain type of rusting effect. The Sophisticated Finishes may not necessarily be something to your liking because, again, of how it constantly evolves and changes, and this is not the type of thing that you'll run into if you use just standard paint for your rusting techniques. Again, just something for the builder to consider. On the front portion over here, we have what appears to be a little driver's visor. I'm sure that this is something, again, from the trials, and if the vehicle was to enter into production, I'm pretty sure they would have an armored visor found in this section over here, but regardless, this is what we have present, so, I just rolled with it. The unit was painted in gloss black, as I generally mention on these builds, and I also went ahead and painted all the various periscopes that are found on the turret in the same type of medium. And this leads us to the main paintwork. So obviously this model here is not replicating the actual TOG-1 tank because of the artistic licenses that I took before. So this is more or less a what-if type configuration, and this allows me some freedom to do basically anything I want with it. So what I did was I went with a early war British type camouflage pattern. This is a type of camouflage pattern that you would see on a large number of British vehicles from the 1940-1939 time frame. And it's painted with Tamiya acrylics. I used Tamiya olive green for the base coat, if I'm not mistaken, and then I used Tamiya black green for the actual camouflage. The colors came out absolutely perfect, and the camouflage pattern is definitely one that I'm going to be recycling these colors for a future build down the road, be it a Matilda or a Valentine or whatever comes on my desk that is from this period. I'm definitely going to recycle the paintwork used on this model over here because I just, it really came out absolutely perfect. For the paint application, of course, the entire model was first primed. I cannot stress that enough, and it was primed my usual format with the use of flat black spray paint. After the flat black was added, again, it had the effect of giving a nice coat on top of the base material, which had the effect of smoothing it out, allowing a better surface and a better finish for the final coats of paint. But regardless, the main base coat was applied via the airbrush, and then for the camouflage work, this was applied with the paintbrush. Because the model is 1/72nd scale, I always found that it's best to apply a camouflage pattern with a paintbrush on these smaller scale models because it gives you a little bit more control over the final application. Of course, when it comes time for using a paintbrush, you want to make sure the paint is at its proper consistency. As I referenced before with the track, this is the type of thing where you want to have all of your ducks in a row. If it's too thick, the paint's going to be chunky. If it's too thin, it's going to run and it's going to be a mess. So this is where the builder really needs to pay attention. The other thing the builder needs to have is an excellent paintbrush. This is not the time to, find a paintbrush on the bottom of your paintbrush, cabinet that's, frayed up. That's not really going to help you very much in this type of application. For this, you want to have a nice, good paintbrush, either a fresh one or one that's in really good shape. And with that and the right mix of paint, you should be able to navigate the camouflage pattern pretty well. After the camouflage work was done, the remainder of the weathering was done with use of both airbrush, paintbrush, and dry brushing when applicable. The use of the airbrush for things like counter shading, washes, I believe even a filter if I'm not mistaken, and then the paintwork was done with a paintbrush. You'll see there's a lot of little streaks here and there. That's all done with the paintbrush. And I also used the Tamiya black panel line accent for the results that you see here. On a vehicle like this, specifically a rhomboidal shaped type tank, the panel line accents are going to be awesome because it gets into all these little panel lines and rivets and just makes everything pop out. It's a fantastic medium to use on basically every tank model, but specifically on a vehicle like this one here. The other paintwork was done with the dry brush, leaving for the distressed edges and the paint chips that I generally, like to add on my model tank builds in the various scales that I work in. Outside of the paintwork, the next thing I want to mention, of course, are the markings. So with this model here not being a true to form rendition of the TOG1, and it's more or less a what if, I went ahead and decided, screw it, let me just go ahead and throw some markings on it, just, to enhance the model's look even further. Fortunately, I was able to have a set of markings that were perfect for this build over here, and these came from another 1/72nd scale British tank build that I recently completed prior to starting this one here. That model was the 1/72nd scale Hasegawa Churchill MK.1 tank, and that is actually the subject matter of its own video found on the ECA channel. Recommend checking that out if you're into braille scale tanks or just British tanks in general, and it's definitely was actually a really cool build, and it was actually a really cool kit. Regardless, with the way that kit is designed, you have an option of 1 or 2 marking configurations. So with that model completed, I had an entire set of markings on hand to equip one tank. So rather than having those decals just languish away in my bin, I simply just incorporated them on this build over here, and at least for the end results that you see presently. I really think that those decals really are a nice cherry on top of this sundae, and it really just makes the model pop all that much more. The decals, of course, are water slide decals, and the Hasegawa decals are excellent in their quality. They went on without any sort of problems, and then they were secured and adhered to the surface with the VMS matte varnish. As I often mention in my builds, the VMS matte varnish is an excellent product. It's super easy to use. It goes on without any sort of problems, and most importantly, it just gives the models that nice, polished, glow look to them. It's just one of those things, it's hard to explain. It's one of those things where if you see it and if you experience it, you'll definitely know what I'm talking about. Regardless, I cannot recommend that product enough if you're building plastic models or tanks specifically and you're trying to figure out a way to seal those decals to the build and just give that model that final polished look. The VMS matte varnish is definitely something to check out. That's really all there is to the build itself. However, I might as well take the opportunity to compare and contrast this vehicle over here with some of its contemporaries. So first, going back to what I mentioned before about the markings, they came from a Hasegawa Churchill MK.1, and I think it would be appropriate because both vehicles are from basically the same era, and since they are the same scale, to compare and contrast the size between the two. Here we have the Churchill MK.1. Now, the Churchill is a substantial size vehicle. They're pretty big, but you can see exactly just how much bigger the TOG1 is in comparison. And it basically dwarfs the Churchill. And also, since I built the other version of the TOG and have that in my collection as well, here you can see what the TOG1 looks like stacked up against the TOG2. Now the playing fields are a bit leveled, I think. As I mentioned before, these two here are 3D printed models from shapeways.com, and the Churchill here is a standard plastic injection molded kit from Hasegawa. And even though they are made from different materials, you can see how well they complement each other when lined up side by side, specifically once they're fully built, painted, and completed. As I mentioned before, the two models that I placed on the table are the subject matter of their own model showcase videos, and both of those videos can be found on the ECA channel. In addition to that, I'll actually have the direct link for both of these videos listed below in the video description. At the end of the day, I couldn't be any happier in how this build turned out. This model here was a very quick, simple, but a satisfying build from start all the way to finish. This subject matter is something that's really, really cool and unique, and it's definitely something that is going to be appreciated in my collection. And if I didn't know any better, that would be the perfect point to swing us into skill level and recommendation. For this model over here, this is very similar to other models in a similar type format, be it the other 1/72 scale 3D printed kits from shapeways.com, two of which I've already brought to on the table, which would have been the Bob Semple tank, as well as also the TOG 2. This one here falls exactly into that same purview. The model itself is ridiculously easy, as we saw from the unboxing portion, where the kit is literally just 2 components in its stock configuration. In its stock format, this thing can be built by literally just about anybody, as it's not really so much a build as it is more or less a exercise in paintwork. Obviously, the model does leave some room for improvement, of which I went over in this video. However, those modifications are something that can be done with a minimal amount of skill and as well as effort. Of course, if you are going to roll with the 3D printed drop-in inserts that I discussed in this video, this does elevate the complexity and the cost of the model from its stock original standpoint. However, this is something that can be done more or less by anyone who has a certain amount of skills under their belt. Basically, if you are going to go with the extra upgrades, this would then put this model in a intermediate type range in terms of a build. Obviously, a experienced builder can easily tackle that, but as a foundation, a minimum, or I should say an intermediate builder should be able to utilize those components on this model here to enhance it to the point that you see in this video. An advanced builder, I would also recommend this model. However, that individual may find this kit to be rather boring in terms of the type of detailing and also with the type of features that they tend to want to have on their builds. Generally, someone with that type of skill range are looking for something with a little bit more complexity and something that has a little bit higher of a part count. And with this model over here being as simplistic as it is, this is something that may turn them off. The model, however, still builds and paints absolutely excellently, even though it is more or less a single printing. The detailing that are found on the prints are very nicely rendered out, and as you can see, once the model is fully painted and weathered, it looks the part without any sort of other problems. That's really all there is to be stated about that, and this brings us into recommendations. So obviously this vehicle here, being its subject matter, is a niche type kit. This again would be the same type of kit I would recommend for the same type of people I recommended the other 2 printed examples that I referenced before. This is one of those models that you're just not going to find in a plastic or traditional kit format, or at least, not as far as I know, and I don't believe there's any even on the horizon. So this is one of those type of vehicle types that if you're really into it, this here is going to be your only option. And fortunately speaking, that's great because the kit here is excellently rendered out, so it's not like you're stuck with a lemon of a kit. This one here will definitely build well and fit and enhance your collection, and should definitely scratch that TOG 1 itch if you indeed have one, and you have to have it. So essentially what I'm saying is that if you are a fan of the British TOG Super Heavy Tank family, this kit here is a no-brainer. If you have the other TOG 2 kit from Shapeways, this one here would be a fantastic accompanying piece, and it's actually a great way to round off the collection. Even though the 2 kits are designed by completely different artists, the quality on each of them are to the point where they both complement each other very, very nicely. This model here is also a fraction of the price compared to the TOG 2 counterpart, so if you are in the market of picking up either of these kits, the addition of this one over here isn't one that's going to break the bank all that much compared to the older brother. Aside from the die-hard TOG aficionados, which there are many out there surprisingly, I would also recommend this kit for anyone who's just an avid fan of British armor or British World War II armor in general. If you're the type of guy that loves the Matilda, the Vickers or the Cromwell, the TOG 1 over here would fit into that collection without batting an eye. On similar lines, if you're a fan of interwar armor or just prototype vehicles, this kit here would also be a nice addition to add to your collection. And also on similar lines, if you are one of those individuals that digs the World War I type vehicles, the rhomboidal shape type early design tanks, this kit here would fit into that collection equally as effortlessly. If you're the type of guy that's got the male, the female, the Liberty, and all the other different rhomboidal shaped tanks that are out there, and there are quite a few on the marketplace, well, this kit here again would fit into that little cool collection very, very nicely indeed. Because it's 1/72nd scale, if you are a Braille scale fan, this kit is also recommended. And on similar lines, if you are into wargaming, this kit here is recommended. However, with the price tag being what it is, this is something that may or may not interest you. Generally with wargaming, you want to have a large number of certain vehicles just to, have your ranks filled out, and with the vehicle here costing what it does, this is something that may be more of a premium thing, but I have seen people spend godly amounts of money on their wargaming hobby, and I'm definitely not one to judge, but if that is something that may potentially come in mind. But with the way this model is designed, this definitely lends itself to wargaming, and you could probably really have this model be put to good use in that type of format. With the way the model is designed, the quality of details that are on it, the simplicity of details on it, as well as the ruggedness of the whole thing, this definitely lends itself for something that can be manhandled a little bit, and for a wargaming type setting, perhaps it's something definitely to consider. Of course, if you are also into making dioramas, 1/72nd scale is an excellent scale to work with for armor for a multitude of reasons, and again, this model here would also make a very interesting diorama scene as its subject matter. The very last person who I'd recommend this kit to is someone who's just looking for something different. Right? You know exactly what I'm referring to. If you're the type of person that are looking for something that's just not a Panther or a Tiger or a Sherman, well, I'd be hard-pressed to find a more exotic vehicle than the British TOG 1 Super Heavy Tank. This is definitely something that is going to add a bit of different flavor to your collection, and it's also something that's going to just, be a bit unique. On a similar note, I would recommend this kit for anyone, again, who's looking for something quick and simple, right? If you're not exactly looking for a protracted build that's going to take you a couple weeks or a few days, if you're just looking for something that's going to take maybe an afternoon or just a weekend, this kit here is absolutely perfect for you. Definitely something I would recommend to that type of a person all day long. Me personally, I absolutely adored this kit over here. Even as simplistic as it is, this was something that was a nice little treat to work on. And yes, I kind of got the, bug to look into other vehicles similar to this, but being 3D printed, as well as also from this type of era with the weird niche prototype or the limited production type thing. So this is definitely something you're going to probably see more of on the channel as time goes on. Of course, I have the Meme Machine playlist, which is going to be dedicated specifically for vehicles like that. And, well, more information on that, of course, is to come as time goes on, and that is the perfect point to sign off on this video, wrapping up this model showcase video for the 1/72nd scale British TOG 1 Super Heavy Tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being small scale model showcase videos like this one over here, or the other larger scale project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel previously. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again, and I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Till then.